you for taking the time to join us today for the final presentation of our 2020 Reshaping Rochester lecture series. This year has been a very special year for us as we celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Reshaping Rochester lecture series and the 10th anniversary of the Reshaping Rochester Awards. 2020 is also very special because we chose to celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment as well as Susan B. Anthony's 200th birthday by seeking out, elevating, and amplifying the voices of female placemakers throughout the entire series. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, my name is Maria Furgiuele, and I am the Executive Director of the Community Design Center of Rochester. This year's theme is building community through placemaking. Through this lens, we consider how the way that we shape our built environment can have a positive impact on our community. The Community Design Center of Rochester was founded in 2003 and is celebrating more than 2 decades of service to the greater Rochester region. We promote design excellence and sustainability in the built environment through advocacy, education, and authentic community engagement. I'd like to introduce our board of directors. On the top row is our executive committee, board president Bill Price, our vice president Monika McCullough, our treasurer Stephanie Annunziata, and our secretary Vanessa Villeneuve, and Paul Tankel is our immediate past president. On the lower row, you'll find Natalie Anderson, Eugenio Marlin, Sheila Sloan, Howard Decker, and Tanya Zweiland. At this time, I'd like to thank all of our board members for their commitment, their guidance, and support. We would like to recognize and thank the New York State Council of the Arts, who has made our work possible through their generous support almost since our inception. I'd also like to recognize Canandaigua National Bank for their long-term commitment to supporting the work of our organization. Our circle of friends are persons or businesses that have made a commitment of sustained support to our organization. We gratefully acknowledge their support. We extend an invitation to any of you who value the work of the Design Center to join our circle. And now, a special thank you to our presenting sponsor. Home Leasing has been our presenting sponsor for the past 4 years, and we are truly grateful for their commitment to the series and their generous support. Special thanks go to the ESL Charitable Foundation for being our honorarium sponsor, and to the Community Preservation Corporation for their generous support as our community outreach and access sponsor. These are our supporting sponsors for the lecture series. And here are our sponsors for our luncheon. Typically, we end the series with a luncheon, but this year has been different in every way. And so I want to recognize and thank all of our sponsors. Gifts generously provided by these sponsors will be sent to our speaker. Special thanks to Gleason for being our evening lecture venue. We look forward to when we'll be able to once again host our in-person lectures there. WXXI is our exclusive media sponsor, and AIA Rochester is our continuing education sponsor. We are humbled to find so many organizations, businesses, and individuals that value our work. We are grateful to each of them for their support. I encourage you to do all that you can to support them, as well as your local businesses during this very challenging year ahead. Lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the unsung heroes that make this series possible. First and foremost, I'd like to recognize our very own office coordinator and Zoom wizard extraordinaire, Monika Reifenstein. Thank you so much for everything that you do. We gratefully acknowledge Lecture Planning Committee that works year-round to plan the series. We are actively engaged in planning next year's series, which is looking amazing. The theme will be Building a Just Community. And thank you so much to our many wonderful volunteers, and especially today, our sign language interpreters. Your feedback is very important to us. Please help us to improve our programming by responding to our survey. If you include your contact information, you will be entered to win a Lift Your Sister t-shirt. And at this time, I'd like to introduce LaShunda Leslie Smith, who is the Executive Director of Connected Communities, among other amazing things.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. It's my great honor to introduce our speaker for today, Carol Naughton. Carol has been a leader in comprehensive community revitalization for more than 20 years. She is a founding staff member of Purpose-Built Communities. In her role as president, she's responsible for leading the consulting teams that support neighborhood revitalization in more than 20 cities. But Purpose-Built Communities has not stopped there. Carol and her team are currently vetting opportunities in more than 35 additional cities, Rochester included. Through her leadership, these quarterback community organizations employ strategies that lead to the highest impact activities in their respective neighborhoods. Rochester has benefited from this pro bono and yet invaluable resource, and it has led to the creation of a comprehensive neighborhood plan that will drive strategic initiatives for connected communities and all of our partners. We could not be more grateful for the trailblazers at Purpose-Built Communities who have given us this proven framework for effective neighborhood revitalization. As you will soon learn, Carol is also a prolific speaker, and she challenges every audience to think bigger about their potential impact on the populations served. Please join me in welcoming Carol Naughton to the stage. Carol?
Thank you, LaShunda, and thank you, Maria. Thank you to the Center for the Community Design Center of Rochester. I am really delighted to be here with you. I wish we could be together in person. Zoom is an imperfect yet extraordinarily helpful tool in these challenging times. So I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to have this conversation today. I should share with you that I am from upstate New York. I grew up in Albany. And in fact, my brother and sister both graduated from the University of Rochester. So I feel a special affection for your city and your community as a fellow upstate New Yorker. I'm delighted to be able to share our story with you today and how we think about creating neighborhoods that at the end of the day produce happy, healthy, economically mobile young people. Can we go to the next slide? Purpose-Built Communities was created about 10 years ago to help local leaders take the lessons we had learned in the Eastlake neighborhood of Atlanta and use them again to create neighborhoods that center racial equity, that generate upward economic mobility, and drive improved health outcomes for families and children in neighborhoods. We took the lessons learned from the Eastlake neighborhood in Atlanta, where we started working, where I started working about 26 years ago with some of the same folks I continue to work with today, to work with the community to create a place that was fundamentally different. And I'll share with you a little bit about that in a minute. But you can see our model is a neighborhood model of revitalization. It's not something that typically is implemented or even needed across an entire city, but it is a neighborhood specific model. And in that neighborhood, we support the implementation of 3 key strategies. The first is high quality mixed income housing that serves families beautifully across a broad range of incomes. Then we help local leaders create a cradle through college education pipeline that is neighborhood serving. Neighborhood serving is a really important element of that. We want every little genius who lives in that neighborhood to have access to a great education, to be kindergarten ready, and to graduate from high school with an actionable, financeable plan for post-secondary education. And then we also think about community health and wellness. What are the kinds of programs and facilities that are necessary in order to be able to create the kind of social capital that everybody is hungry for in the place where they live, to create opportunities to become your full self, to create those opportunities that allow everybody to reach their full potential. Now, this is really long-term, complex, tough work. And we think the reason it has been successful in Eastlake and it is successful across our network is because of this organization that we call a community quarterback organization. It's almost always a newly created nonprofit organization that works with the neighbors and the community and potential implementation partners to create a highly customized local plan to take this model and implement it in their own community. LaShunda, as the head of Connected Communities, runs that, what we call that community quarterback organization in Rochester. I will tell you, LaShunda is just such a driving force. If we could clone LaShunda, we could take over the world for goodness and light. She's just a terrific leader with both the brain power, the passion, and the creativity to build this kind of infrastructure that will help every family reach their full potential. Let's go to the next slide. As I mentioned, purpose-built work sprang from the revitalization of the Eastlake neighborhood in Atlanta, which started back in the mid-1990s. If you looked at the data from Eastlake Meadows, you'd be really stunned to see the conditions that people were living in and the kinds of things that they had to fight up against. The crime rate was 18 times the national average. Andy Young used to say that the only time the haves and the have-nots came together in Eastlake was over that $35 million a year drug trade. Only 5% of fifth graders could pass the state math test, and only about 30% of high school students graduated. Median incomes were about $4,500 a year, and only 13% of adults worked. But even under those very difficult situations, Eastlake had some amazing people who were frustrated and angry and who knew that they could do better. They knew that it wasn't their fault that they were living in these conditions, but that the systems at play had created the conditions that have made it very difficult for anybody who lived in that neighborhood to get ahead. Oh, I've dropped my little thing. I'm going to keep moving. Hope you can hear. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hold on. I'm going to make an adjustment.
Yes, Carol, we can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. Pardon me, I've got new earbuds. I'm just learning how to use them. As I was saying, Eastlake had these amazing leaders, amazing people who knew we needed to do something better and that we could do something together. And so led by Eva Davis, who represented the Resident Association, and with the leadership from the Atlanta Housing Authority, and with this new organization called the Eastlake Foundation, we all worked together for about 3 years to plan together what we would like to see happen in this community so that people had a better chance of participating in the American dream. It took 3 years to build trust and build relationships in order to be able to move forward. And when we finished the planning at the end of the 3 years, the residents voted in favor of moving forward, and we moved together to execute the plan. Let's go to the next slide. So we executed that plan, which was included mixed income housing, a cradle through college education pipeline, and community health and wellness. And you can see the outcomes for kids have been terrific. The outcomes for everybody in the neighborhood have been excellent. Crime is down dramatically, both all crime and violent crime. I went on a ride along with the police in Eastlake 2 years ago, and it was boring. Which was not the case 20 years ago. Families who receive the public housing subsidy are all working. or in a job training program designed to lead to work if they're not elderly or disabled. So everybody is working. In fact, the families who receive the public housing assistance, their incomes are 5 times higher than when we first started. Over the last 4 years, the graduation rate for young people in the neighborhood, the combined rate is 98.7%. And the elementary school is now in the top 3% of the state. So kids have access to a great education that continues to serve the neighborhood and prepare them for life anywhere in the world, prepare them to be competitive with anybody so the world truly becomes their oyster. Let's go to the next slide. So Purpose Built was really created because, I should share, I worked for the Atlanta Housing Authority from 1995 through 2001, and my very first project was Eastlake. And so I worked on that project along with 15 other neighborhood revitalization sites and helped reinvent the way we deliver public housing by developing the legal and financial model to do mixed income housing. And Eastlake's data got better and better. And let me back up. I left the Housing Authority in 2001 and became the head of the Eastlake Foundation, this newly created organization who was there to help figure out what this community needed in order to be successful. And every year, our data got better and better, frankly. We would see test scores starting to slowly improve in education. We saw crime going down pretty quickly. We saw residents' incomes going up. We saw people staying in the community longer because it could compete for them. So transiency was going down. And as a result, people started coming to Eastlake and they said, this is really cool, we want to do it too. But the Eastlake Foundation didn't have the capacity to do that on its own. And so Purpose-Built Communities was started in order to take the lessons learned from the Eastlake neighborhood and help folks around the country take those lessons and customize them and be able to help implement that same kind of model in their own communities. We have 28 network members. These are represented by the blue dots on your screen. You can see we are largely but not completely east of the Mississippi. We started in the southeast and then we have been growing north, east, and west since that time. Let's go to the next slide, please. So it's not only Eastlake where we're starting to see great outcomes. We're starting to see really strong outcomes from the other communities where we work. For example, now in the Bayou District, which is a neighborhood in New Orleans, now 95% of kids in the early learning center, that serves that neighborhood, finish pre-K, kindergarten ready. That's in a neighborhood where very few kids were considered pre-K or kindergarten ready. In the north side, in Spartanburg, South Carolina, small little mighty Spartanburg, which was one of the most dangerous cities in America to be a black man. Now that we've had a 66% reduction in overall crime from 2011 through 2018. And in historic South Atlanta, a neighborhood about 4 miles from the Eastlake neighborhood, 33% of neighborhood single-family homes are owned by low-income residents. So we've been able to work with partners to help drive better outcomes, really to think about what are the conditions necessary to improve economic mobility. How do we work to improve better health outcomes? And how do we embed racial equity in all of our work, in all of our decisions? Let's go to the next slide. So as I said, Purpose Built started a little over 10 years ago, and we've learned a lot, and we're in the process of trying to learn more right now. So we've learned the model that we came out of Eastlake is in fact replicable. This to me was one of the big ahas. If you had asked me 10 years ago whether I was in the health outcomes business, I would have said, heck no, I'm a community developer. If you asked me that same question today, I would have said, heck yeah, I am a community developer. We are absolutely in the health outcomes business because we understand now that health is more than what happens in the doctor's office. Health is generated by the conditions in which you live, work, play, and learn. If you live in a good house that isn't a sick house, if you live in a neighborhood that is safe, if you go to a good school, these are all the conditions that drive health outcomes. The people in the public health world call them the social determinants of health. I just call them the determinants of health. So what we've also come to realize is that healthcare institutions recognize that they are not just in the healthcare business, they are in the health business. And so we're able to generate more robust partnerships with healthcare institutions and systems, helping them invest upstream in order to drive better outcomes. I'll share with you in Orlando, Florida, Advent Health, now, which is the big hospital system in Orlando, operates an early learning center in the neighborhood that we support. And that early learning center isn't designed to serve people who work for the hospital. It serves people who live in that neighborhood with an expectation, because the health system gets it. Health happens outside the doctor's office. And one of the best things you can do to drive health outcomes for a lifetime is to invest in high quality early learning. So one of the other ahas that we've experienced is that we need to be explicit about racial equity and the history of racial, malintended racial policies in the neighborhoods where we work. Honestly, until about 5 years ago, we did not talk about race explicitly. We used income, frankly, as a proxy for race, and we realized that we were being chicken. We weren't being brave. We needed to learn and understand and develop the language and skills to be able to talk honestly about racism in our country, about structural racism, and how it impacted the neighborhoods that we care about. So we know that segregation that happened all across the country, whether we were in the Jim Crow South or in upstate New York, all of those policies and practices that were put in place by our federal, state, and local governments with the complicity and sometimes enthusiastic partnership of the private sector created the conditions that we're challenged by today. Those neighborhoods of concentrated poverty were engineered into existence by those malintended public policies. The good news is that if they were engineered into existence, they can be engineered out of existence. But in order to be able to be thoughtful about that, we have to call it as we see them, and we have to be candid about what those policies and practices did to our Black and brown brothers and sisters. One of the other things that we know, high capacity local leadership is essential. Purpose-built can be your partner. We can't replace that local leadership. We don't make decisions about what happens in the community. We want to provide you with all the best options and have those decisions made locally. That requires high capacity local leadership from civic and business sectors. We need the support of the public sector as well, but those civic and business leaders can help institutionalize the commitment to work in a neighborhood and drive change across political timeframes. So, let me just say, in Atlanta, in Eastlake, over 25 years, gosh, we've had, 5 presidents or so. We've had 4 mayors. We've had 4 city council members, a variety of state senators and representatives. But what has stayed consistent is the Eastlake Foundation, that organization whose board members include local business and civic leaders that help institutionalize this work and drive it long term beyond the time frame that any one political leader will have. In Atlanta, you are limited to serving 2 terms as mayor. And so if we rely on the public sector, we're never going to have the long-term focus that this takes in order to do that work. Education, man, we all know education is central, but education quality drives and sustains both the real estate and human capital revitalizations. We know how important education is to people. We also know how important it is to a community. The suburbs and suburban school districts, frankly, understand that one of the reasons people will move there is their school systems are perceived as being good. Schools are drivers of economic development. And so we want to recognize that in the urban setting too. And by having a neighborhood serving education pipeline, it can attract people to the neighborhood and people will stay in the neighborhood long term because the education system continues to be of value for them and their children. The other thing that we have learned is that the world is moving in our direction. 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of research on this, but if we go to the next slide, you'll get a sense of some of the folks who have done research in this area about how where you live impacts your place. Where you live impacts your life prospects. What we know now is the neighborhood in which you live is the best predictor of what your economic and social success is likely to be in this world. And so by creating neighborhoods that support folks so they can really participate in the American dream, we think this is going to be a really important strategy to move forward. And so you see great people like Dr. David Williams at Harvard, who's done so much important research on how racism is making us sick and how poverty, place, and racism are tied together. How Robert Sampson, who's an economist, thinks about how changing place, improving place, may in fact provide better opportunities for people to move up the food chain than delivering programs. I would argue we need to do both. If you create a healthy place, programs that are designed to move people on economic mobility can take purchase and be successful. Raj Chetty's work, looking at what neighborhoods and what places seem to drive economic mobility and what don't, are really important. So anyway, take a look at some of these places and some of this research. I think it will support the idea that you as placemakers will know and understand intuitively. Let's go to the next slide. I wanted to share with you some of the really cool things that are happening across our network in placemaking, things that go beyond housing, that go beyond education and health and wellness, but really create interesting places for the community to come together, places, again, where that social capital can grow and develop. This first one is outstanding. It's called the Accelerator, and it's in the Highlander neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska. This is a neighborhood that has been historically African American, but where there hadn't been any really new investment in about 35 years before this project started. And while it includes really outstanding and beautiful new mixed income housing, a newly reconstituted elementary school, a partnership with health centers and others, it did not historically have this kind of place where people came together. And so this new facility called the Accelerator creates space for people inside the neighborhood and outside the neighborhood to come together and learn together or do things together. So you can see, number one, it's beautiful. And I really want to stress that. So often we deliver institutional looking buildings in low income neighborhoods. And it's like we almost think somehow that beauty isn't something that low income families deserve. I want to disabuse ourselves of this nature, of this idea. We need to build beauty into lower income neighborhoods and raise the standards. Beauty matters to all of us. As you look at these little pictures here, I want to point out a couple of things. This building, I'm not sure you'll be able, on the top row in the middle, that space is called the Venue. And what that is a place for a very affordable amount of money. People in the community can rent it for weddings, community meetings, all different kinds of places. And now people are able to keep their money for their big family events in their community, as opposed to having to go to downtown or midtown Omaha in order to do something. There's been two, really important education partners have created campuses in the Accelerator building. Both Creighton University and Metro Community College has created a North Express campus right in there. So really easy access to people in the neighborhood to begin working on courses offered by the community college. There's also 4 great places to get food and drinks and beverages. So Hardy Coffee, fabulous coffee shop, Big Mama's Kitchen and Catering, which had been a long-standing institution in North Omaha. Pico, a new Mexican restaurant, and the Highlander Bar and Grill are all part of the food court in this building as well. Also, find this really cool new project called the Connect, which is really like a high-tech business center that is free for people in the neighborhood to learn coding, to be able to have access to computers and internet to the extent they don't have them in their homes, do all kinds of really good access to technology along with coaching in order to learn how to use the technology as well. The Charles Drew Health Center has a center there, and then 75 North Development Corporation, which is the community quarterback organization, the comparable organization to Connected Communities, has its offices here. I also want to point out that this space can be used for lots of things. So you can see people watching movies outside on a big screen and a yoga class taking place. So the space has really been activated in a beautiful way that brings people together across race and income and ethnicity. It's a really, really wonderful example of how you can use this kind of placemaking to support neighborhood revitalization and everybody in the community. Let's go to the next one. This is a smaller version in Birmingham, Alabama. This is called the Social Venture Hub. And I think it's a really cool space. It's an old warehouse that was converted through a partnership between the Woodlawn Foundation, which is the community quarterback organization in Birmingham, and Rev Birmingham. You may be familiar with Rev Birmingham and other organizations like it who were part of the Main Street program supported by the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And the idea was for Rev Birmingham wanted to create vibrant commercial spaces across the city of Birmingham in neighborhoods that had lost that sense of vibrancy. The Woodlawn Foundation knew that creating a co-working space and office space for nonprofits and others would be create, again, that place where social capital would come together. In addition to the working space, it has a really beautiful art gallery and beautiful space that the neighbors can access for free in order to hold meetings. So it really has become the hub of the neighborhood. And this one was done without the same kind of philanthropic investment that was required in Omaha. But another great opportunity. You can see it's kind of cool and trendy and attracts people, again, from the neighborhood, but also from outside the neighborhood. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, historic South Atlanta. This is such an important neighborhood. And I wanted to share historic South Atlanta's journey a little bit with you today as well. During this difficult summer, I'm sure you all saw the instance of Rayshard Brooks being killed by the police in Atlanta at a Wendy's, and the protest that created, not just in Atlanta, but around the country. That happened about a block and a half from the Carver Market, which is right here. So the neighborhood in which we worked, we continue to work, a neighborhood that has, gone through this really deep sense of what this deep trauma, but also recognizing the beauty of people coming together to support one another. So it's like this, I'm not doing it justice, but it is the idea that beauty and brutality are existing side by side in this neighborhood right now, but residents are coming together to support one another and support the community. The Carver Market that you see right here was vandalized during the protests. Even though this is a nonprofit market that's the only grocery store within miles of this community, people from outside the neighborhood vandalized it because they just assumed it was something that it isn't. It also includes Community Grounds, which is a great nonprofit coffee shop as well, that is a center of community activity. Now, one of the things I love about this group is for the last 15 years, they have been slowly acquiring homes in this neighborhood that until recently was really an overlooked neighborhood from a real estate development perspective. And they bought these houses and they renovated them. They sold some of them at market rents. They sold others to lower income families at subsidized rates. They rented some of them to extremely low income families. And so now they have created a neighborhood of over 150 homes that is mixed income and sustainably mixed income long term because of the financing structures and the restrictions on transfer that have been put in place. It is a beautiful model that can be replicated in different places. It requires some investment up front, and it requires a group like FCS to be able to execute this over the long term, focused community strategies. They also work in partnership, I should say, with Purpose-Built Schools, which is an affiliate of Purpose-Built Communities. Purpose-Built Schools Atlanta operates 4 schools on behalf of the district, not as charters, but as traditional neighborhood serving schools. So there's a really robust partnership there. Let's go to the next slide. So I can talk a lot. I love this work. I love what we get to do. And I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for conversation. And so I think if we can ask Maria to come back in, we can spend the next 20 minutes or so in conversation and questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Carol. I can't tell you how informative this has been. And also, I could hear you speak forever. So hopefully we can engage in some great conversation. We are especially fortunate in Rochester to have connected communities working here. I wish I knew right off the top of my head, but they have been working very, very hard in this city for a long time now. I know at least 5 years. So this kind of work takes time.
It does.
So I love the comment that you made about, foundations and organizations that transcend the political timelines and how critically important they are to doing this kind of paced work. So thank you so much for that. On this last note that you made, I think we'll work a little bit backwards. First, I want to instruct the participants, if you would please submit your questions through the Q&A function so that I may be able to pose those questions to Carol. In the meantime, we'll engage in some conversation. Please, as soon as you have a question, pop one in there and I will try to get to as many as we can. We do have, this event was scheduled to be a little longer. So for those of you that might need to leave right at 1 o'clock, the event is being recorded and will be shared with all of you. If you can stay longer and Carol is available, we can answer more questions. So just so you all know. I love this idea of this organization, or I want to ask you, what was this organization that facilitated the purchasing and reselling of homes in the historic South Atlanta neighborhood? Can that type of model, can that become another type of model that can be implemented in other neighborhoods and communities?
The organization that did that is called Focused Community Strategies, FCS for short. I encourage you to go to their website. You can learn a little bit about it. They've actually created a center called the Lupton Center, where they help churches and other organizations learn how to do what they have done. It is, they were doing it at exactly the right time in Atlanta. They started acquiring land in historic South Atlanta as homes became available, or they were vacant, or they're available. During the recession. So they were able to buy land and then they had philanthropic funding and some little bit of public funding that they could use to be able to renovate the houses. And when they would sell them, they would pay back their investors. And so it requires some capital on the front end in order to be able to execute. But you really need an organization who's really just committed to that neighborhood in order to be able to do that with the same kind of focus on equity and inclusion that they have done their entire way of being for the last 45 years of focused community strategies. They are really centering racial equity in their work. Most of the people who work at FCS live in the neighborhood. They make a real commitment to be part of a community for the long term.
Great. I don't know if you're aware that we have here in Rochester I'll let the interpreter connect here. We have in Rochester a community land trust. So, again, I believe it's trying to fill that, that need of creating diverse pathways for, I always say we need to create opportunities so that everyone can find a place where they can fit in and contribute to to their community.
Mm-hmm.
So by having, you know, a diverse range of rents and housing typologies and sizes, we can let people kind of fit themselves into where they can contribute. So hopefully that, I will look more into the focused community strategies, but I think our community land trust is probably striving to achieve the same things.
I think likely we're exploring a community land trust in Eastlake now. So, you know, 25 years after we started, we're looking at a community land trust that could include housing for maybe 40 families. And then some of our network members are using the community land trust model as well. And what I love about it is it can be highly customized to achieve the goals that a particular community has. You can, you know, do you care mostly about access to housing, or do you care about wealth building, or you do a little bit of both, or are you targeting first-time home buyers or another population? I love the flexibility in it.
That's wonderful. This leads us to a question by Jane Bleeg. She asks, do any communities include co-housing? And
ooh, great question. So right now, no, but I will tell you, right across the street from the villages of Eastlake, kitty corner, is this beautiful co-housing development in Atlanta called Eastlake Commons. And one of my former colleagues at Purpose Built Communities was one of the founders of Eastlake Commons. And so while nobody else has chosen to implement a co-housing model, it's something that I could see happening down the road. So far, what we've seen, most co-housing isn't particularly affordable. And it's hard to figure out how to develop the resources for affordability for the very lowest income families in a co-housing model, but somebody's going to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I would hope someone would. I know that one of the things that we often talk about here in Rochester is that we have a very old housing stock. And some of those houses tend to be really large homes. And as we look at demographic trends, we're seeing family unit sizes shrink, people intentionally choosing not to have children. And so then the question is, what do we do with these large old houses? Can they serve a different way of living? I think we have to start to be more creative about the options that are available, because people need to find ways to share resources. And we do have an immigrant population that are used to communal living. So how can we, find these other opportunities?
I think that's so smart. I just wanted to say, I think both, thinking about who the populations are who might be attracted to having, 3 or 4 families in a big house that's appropriately designed and can support that number of people is important. But I also think now COVID and what we've been through are going to make people rethink multi-generational living. There may be advantages to that we had been not really thinking about before COVID. And so you may find that there'll be a new market for families who want to be able to have a place for their in-law or for in-laws or for brothers or sisters or adult children to stay longer than what we've historically had, or at least over the last couple of generations.
All right. I have a question from, I believe, Walkings. I apologize, no first name. So I admire you and your excellent work. You said your organization's focus is on neighborhoods and not cities. That makes sense. We have the most stake in where we live, but I think of our public market, which is a hub of economic activity and where people from all over come together. It has been busy for 100 years. How have any of your projects leveraged such citywide assets?
Ooh, great question. Great question. Let me think. So lots of our network members in neighborhood projects, I think one of the challenges that they all have to think about is like, what is their hook, or what is a hook that they can use as an organizing theme, or that there's a special asset in the community or a historic connection to something in their city, and how do you use that? And, I think we think about universities and hospitals as anchor institutions in some of that way. We're also seeing people using public parks as the kind of asset that we just talked about. In Eastlake, in Atlanta, the historic Eastlake Golf Course became an asset that is really a social enterprise that at the end of the day throws off cash to support the sustainability of the Eastlake project. But thinking about what is your neighborhood's connection to that particular asset is a really good question to explore early on. I'm really glad you raised it. I don't have the perfect answer. I can't say, oh yeah, so and so has done this with a public market, but have good examples of partnering with health systems, with universities, with public parks. In Dallas now, with the anchor of a new project is going to be a historic theater that is being renovated and revitalized in a very different way than I've ever seen any other historic theater revitalized. So people are using these assets and their connection to those assets to both create connections to the broader community and to create that organizing hook or that organizing theme for a neighborhood.
Yes, and we've seen also with the pandemic kind of the shift in the way people are living and working is kind of exposed some fragility in our communities, and realizing that the things that we like to have aren't necessarily nearby or inaccessible. And then now the opportunity to find ways to create those 15-minute neighborhoods or cities where we start to think about what is it that I'd love to have near where I live so that I can have access to those things. So it's an interesting time for that, for sure. Dwayne Feller has a question. You raised a number of good points in your presentation. However, you did not address the need for public transit access to jobs, healthcare, and education. In Rochester, housing is already affordable, although there is a lot that can be done to improve it. We have good healthcare, but our jobs and healthcare facilities are largely sprawled outside of the city, and transit access is very poor. Can you comment on the importance of having good public transit?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for that question. In fact, I'll share with you when we first kind of tried to define our model. You remember that little house I showed you in the beginning of my presentation? We included two other pillars, one of which was transportation and the other was economic development, and ultimately came to the conclusion that both transportation and economic development fall into that community health and wellness pillar. Honestly, we knew people couldn't remember more than three things. And so that was really the strategy, not to diminish the importance of it. Many of the places where we are invited to work do not have robust public transportation systems. They rely on buses. They often don't have high-speed trains. They don't have streetcars. And so a lot of the work on the ground on the front end that the community quarterback and community members are engaged in is how can we improve access to public transportation in this neighborhood? And some of it is advocating to get more and better route service in a neighborhood that connects people with jobs. We had an experience early in my career at the Eastlake Foundation. Downtown is 3 miles from Eastlake, 3 miles. But it took an hour and a half and 2 buses to get to those 3 miles. I could have walked faster. So we worked with MARTA, and we being the neighborhood, worked with MARTA, our Metropolitan Transit Authority, to improve bus service. And then the Eastlake Foundation went out and raised some money to improve the bus stops, to make them more pleasant places. People used to have to stand in the mud and the rain in the old Eastlake Meadows to wait for the bus if and when it came. And so improving both access to transportation and your experience as a customer, right, was an important part of thinking about what this would be like. But all of our network members, all of these community quarterbacks look at transportation and that how do you create that connective tissue so people can have access to the jobs. We know it's not going to be possible to have everybody live within walking distance to a job, but how can we create ways to make sure people can have access to it? Excuse me.
It's okay. I know that we often, think about the need for public transit was always there because it is a system that is generally underfunded. Again, racism plays into, we're learning so much more about how decisions are made and how they're impacting particular neighborhoods. And so I've heard talk about why there aren't bus shelters in certain places because some people don't want people to hang out there and things like that. So having a better understanding of all those things is important. We've always, as an organization, really been strong advocates for walkability and doing primary resources, putting our resources towards improving the pedestrian experience. Because again, as we say, every trip starts and ends, on your feet or on your wheels if you're in a wheelchair. So certainly having well-maintained sidewalks, cleared sidewalks, the crosswalks and all those things is one very immediate thing that can have a tremendous impact on a neighborhood. And of course, the other thing that we advocate for is, we're going through a rezoning now in Rochester where we're looking at, can we go back to allowing mixed uses in our neighborhoods, again, to bring some of those incremental job centers, those smaller businesses that could be fitted into the neighborhoods back, so that perhaps that connection of having someone have to take a bus a long distance to a job is no longer there. So that would be wonderful to think about. Your mention of community quarterback leads us to our next question. Ellen Oberst says, I'm especially interested in the community quarterback organizations that adapt this approach to each community. I've been involved in community work for 3 decades, and I've come to believe that traditional neighborhood organizations, neighborhood associations and block clubs, simply don't have the capacity, the mission, or the access to resources necessary to grapple with contemporary problems like preventing gentrification and displacement, addressing lack of equity, dealing with the environmental degradation, etc. So I'm interested in knowing more about the quarterback organization and how it builds the necessary capacity among residents and develops the resources necessary to have adequate impact.
Oh, such a good question. And I would agree with you that while neighborhood associations and civic associations are really good and important in and of themselves, they generally don't have the capacity, access to resources to drive this kind of transformative change. They also have different agendas. And I think one of the things that is important in a community quarterback is to be really clear about what your agenda is, what you are trying to accomplish, and to be transparent with those goals and objectives. There are a couple of community quarterback organizations that I would hold up as really exemplars of organizations that have worked beautifully with the community and been able to connect access to philanthropic and other capital with the plans and the desires of the neighborhood. One is the Woodlawn Foundation in Birmingham, Alabama, who have done a magnificent job of centering racial equity in their work and working with the community to create this infrastructure that will be sustainable long term. So take a look at them. Let me see. Who else? Oh gosh, there's so many of them are so good. Of course, I think the Eastlake Foundation is a terrific example, and that's really evolved over time. FCS Urban Ministries, FCS I mentioned earlier in historic South Atlanta, Focus Community Strategies is just an extraordinary group. So I think, I will say, when we assume that communities are going to be able to do it themselves, it's kind of like we make the problems that were created systematically the responsibility of the people who happen to live there today, who've often been negatively impacted by those systems, to say, okay, you guys figure it out. And I think that's just chicken. And I think that's wrong-headed. And we've got to find mechanisms that create opportunities for people within neighborhoods and outside of neighborhoods to work together with a common vision and a common goal of creating greater equity in their community. Oftentimes people will ask me, if I'm a rich white guy, why should I care about this? Why should I care about urban poverty, particularly as it doesn't impact my neighborhood, right? And there are a lot of reasons, aside from it's the right thing to do. There are a lot of economic reasons why we should all care about creating a more just and equitable America. Right now, we've got, when Social Security started, there were 150 recipients for every worker, or I'm sorry, 150 workers for every recipient of Social Security. Today, there are 2.9 workers for every recipient of Social Security. When I retire in 2030, there will be 2 workers for every recipient, and 50% of those workers will be Black or brown. Our country, our economic security, and our national security, our ability to be competitive around the world, our ability to maintain our standard of living as a country depends on everybody being well educated and having an opportunity to compete in our society, to offer their skills and their talents and all the good things that they bring in this world to our economy. And unless we figure out how to do that, we're really up a creek without a ladder. Don't get me started.
Up the creek without a ladder. I like that one. Well, I know that one of the pillars for purpose-built communities is education, a very important fundamental one. And Beth Cyber has a question. What does it mean and what does it look like to operate schools with the district that are not charter schools?
Sure. We are, from purpose-built standpoint, we're typically agnostic as to the governance structure of a school. So there are some places where we work with charter schools. There's some places where we work with traditional public school systems under an agreement between the community quarterback and the school system. And there's some places where there are contract schools, where there is another nonprofit that operates the school and has a contract with the district. All of those ways can work. We have a couple of really exciting examples of partnerships with the district between the community quarterback organization and the public school system, where the district continues to operate those schools. In Syracuse and in Dallas, Texas, are the 2 that I'm most excited about right now. We're doing a replication of the Charles Drew Charter School in Omaha, Nebraska, in a traditional public school, but using the school design that was developed in Eastlake at the charter school. And so far, that's having good results. The question is, do you have a school system that wants to partner? Some school systems say, I got this, and they want to do everything themselves, right? And some school systems say, we recognize that we know how to do a lot of things really well, but some of the things that are getting in the way of our children being successful require other partners to be at the table. And then other school systems, when they have created strategic plans, when we've looked at the strategic plans, we've been able to say, with the local community quarterback, here is a way that our work together could help you be successful under a particular element of your strategic plan. So the governance structure isn't as important as having the support of the superintendent, the support of the board, and a principal who is all in on that. And then we can collectively work on the strategies that are necessary both inside the school and outside the school in order to support children so that they can reach their full potential. Lots of different ways to skin the cat, but there has to be a commitment to partnership, to joint decision making, and to staying the course over a period of time. As we've said earlier, this work takes a long time. It took us 10 years to go from being the lowest performing school in the city of Atlanta in Eastlake to being the highest performing school. It doesn't happen overnight. So you need a partner, an education partner, who's with you regardless of the governance structure all the way, and who's willing to keep changing and learning and making mid-course corrections based on what you've learned and how the community has evolved and how children are better prepared, for example, now because every little genius is going to high-quality early learning. If every kid is going to high-quality early learning in your neighborhood, your school partner has to change how they deliver kindergarten and first grade and second grade and third grade because kids are coming to school better prepared. So you've got to have that kind of vertical alignment and those really deep partnerships where people are willing to sit down, roll up their sleeves, and solve those kinds of issues, those problems and opportunities together.
Thank you. I know that in the Rochester School District has been in crisis, and I recall information from the past that said that one of a very large and significant part of the budget is dedicated to transportation. And it seemed to me a bit of an oxymoron that an urban school district spends so much money on moving kids around. So it leads me to kind of, I'd like to get your thoughts on the value and importance of community neighborhood schools. I know that Connected Communities was really successful in one of their big early successes is building that pipeline from the community neighborhood elementary school to the neighborhood high school, and how valuable that is. So can you share a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Oh, thank you for that. That Cradles for College Education pipeline, that neighborhood serving Cradles for College Education pipeline is so important in this kind of work, because remember, we're not just trying to create a nice place. Of course, that's part of it, right? We want to create a great place and a great neighborhood, but we want to create relationships. We want to create social capital. We want to create deep opportunities for people to get to know each other. And one of the best ways to do that is at a neighborhood school. Whether you're talking about an early learning center at elementary, middle, or high school, neighborhood schools are real. When you have the right leadership and the right opportunities there, you create this amazing cauldron that creates a place not just for kids to get to know each other, but for parents to get to know each other. To have parents sitting together at a concert or at a robotics competition or at a basketball game, and when they're together across race and income and ethnicity, religion, because they're all there cheering on their children and their community, you really can create some wonderful opportunities for social capital to develop. You have to know how to leverage those things. And that's why I think the leader of the school and all the partners at the table need to be aware of the opportunity that you have when that starts to happen. And then how do you take it and build upon it? Not just think of it as organic, but how do you very strategically think about, oh, okay, gosh, we've got 100 families coming out to watch the robotics competition. What can we do to create more opportunities for them to get to know each other while they're there, rather than just sit by themselves cheering on their kids in the robotics competition? What are the things that we can do as a school? What are the things that we can do as partners to create those opportunities for parents to get to know one another and to develop those relationships that are going to benefit parents and kids and community?
So in a very important way, having a neighborhood school is central and as important, I think, as having good quality housing.
Absolutely.
Building a stable neighborhood, which is in fact then the foundation to building us to having people be able to access other resources that they can then have through shared networking, right? You can't really feel like you can build your network of support when you're moving from place to place and having to reestablish your social
That's right.
connection.
A part of what I think about, how does a neighborhood compete? How does it compete for the people who live there today so they want to stay, right? What does it have to offer? So if I get a little extra change in my pocket because I've gotten a raise or a better job, and if my neighborhood can't compete, the first thing I'm going to do is leave and go to a better neighborhood, right? So what does the neighborhood have to offer in order for people to want to be able to stay? People have to be able to say rationally that I'll stay here because the school is great, because my family is well served, because I can walk to the kinds of places I want to walk to. So we think about that. What does it take to get people to stay? And because lots of the places where we've been invited to work are places that are underpopulated. Frankly, there are places that are not viable because they don't have enough people in them. What do you need to do to get some other people to move in too? And again, to want to stay because the neighborhood is great for them. Right now, it's a as I said, in many neighborhoods that are struggling because the schools aren't good, or the housing quality is substandard, or crime is perceived to be an issue, or there's no grocery store. As soon as you get a little cash in your pocket, you leave because you can. And so if we think about how do we create neighborhoods that will compete for people to be able to stay, I think we can really change the dynamics of how we deliver programs, how we deliver opportunities, how we deliver education to the lowest income folks, because we're treating people as if they can vote with their feet. And unless we deliver A plus kinds of services and opportunities, people will vote with their feet and leave.
Thank you, Carol. Carol, we've come up on a little past 1. Are you available for a little longer, or do you need to disconnect?
I think so. I think I've got a little bit more time.
Wonderful. We have a couple of great questions coming up, so I want to focus on those questions. One is, we have someone who is listening from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh.
I work with many local residents who are descendants of the race massacre and or live in the historic boundary of the Greenwood community, a freedom colony founded by African Americans before Oklahoma statehood. Tulsa's history of racial segregation and urban renewal has left the historically Black neighborhoods blighted and disenfranchised. This community is also bereft of nonprofit organizations like the NAACP or the Urban League that can often help to incubate initiatives that create revitalization. What do you recommend as a starting process for ordinary citizens starting from square one?
Thank you for that question. And I want to say, we support a project in the Kendall Whittier neighborhood of Tulsa, and had a chance to visit Greenwood last year when we were in Tulsa for a meeting, and appreciated the chance to be there and learn more about the history of the race massacre. And so thank you for that question. And I'm sure you know my friends Kojo and Anika, but I won't go on there. So if you want to start, I think the first thing is to start talking to other civic leaders in your community. Start talking to people about what would they like to see in their community. What do they like about their community? What else would they like to see in their neighborhood? And then, you start to create this little groundswell of say, yeah, we might be ready for something new. We might be ready for change. It's almost a pre-work phase. And then, frankly, I'd be happy to connect you to the folks that we support in the other neighborhood. And I'm sure they could share with you some of the strategies that have worked well for them in Tulsa. But I think it's getting, that first step is always getting some people from the neighborhood, just regular folks, opinion leaders in your neighborhood, to come together and say, what is it that we value here that we want to build, we want to see more of, what's missing, and how do we move forward? And then we can often help connect you with different kind of philanthropies and donors who are interested in supporting this, and help build a groundswell of support for public sector investment in communities as well. So, I mean, all those things are important, but I'd start by having real conversations. You're welcome to go to our website, and there's some beautiful videos, 6 minutes long or so, from the neighborhoods where we've been invited to work, and you get a sense of the kinds of things that have been important to community leaders in that neighborhood. I might suggest you look at Grove Park in Atlanta. Their video is particularly meaningful.
Thank you. I know that I don't know if there is access to academic institutions or a community design center such as ours, as we find that, again, that pre-work really involves coming together, having opportunities to share information, and organizing, and of course that's to create that foundation for being able to build upon. On that note, Carol, are you familiar with anybody who has worked around the country partnering with community design centers such as ours?
In Omaha, the team in North Omaha has worked with a community design center. In fact, the community design center is also tied into the new project that we support in South Omaha. That's the only one that rings a bell off the top of my head. That doesn't mean there aren't more, but that's the only one I'm thinking of right now.
Okay. I know that Dave Bianetti had a question. Energy reduction and therefore cost of living reductions We are working to apply passive housing design techniques in our region to improve older structures. Are you also using these techniques to reduce expenses of living and make the old buildings more sustainable and beautiful?
So most of the places we work are involved new construction and not as much renovation, with a couple of exceptions. So in the new construction area, so much of the requirements are generated by state housing finance agencies who set the requirements for the qualified allocation plan on how low-income housing tax credits are awarded. So they are the 800-pound gorilla in terms of thinking about how you would impact energy efficiency and reducing the cost of operating a unit on a scale across the state. In some of the places where we've been invited to work, we are seeing renovations being done with an idea of like, how do we really make this house cost effective? But we haven't focused on that area as much. And so we have lots to learn from others. We followed some folks in Raleigh, North Carolina, who are doing really interesting work in that space. They've actually even moved houses from one neighborhood to another. And as they've moved them, they have renovated them in a way to be incredibly energy efficient. So we'll learn more about that based on what the needs of our network members are.
Great. And Carol, we have just 2 more questions and then we'll call it a day. So one kind of relates to something that you said. There's always this question of gentrification, this
Sure.
concern about if we open up our community to invite other people to come in and our community, or we do things to improve our neighborhoods, all of a sudden we become popular, and then we have gentrification. So this question kind of relates to that in another way. I've heard about neighborhoods in Brooklyn where white people have moved in over the years and taken over the public schools. Also about Johns Hopkins taking over neighborhoods around the hospital complex, harboring resentment among longtime residents. We have a similar situation here with University of Rochester, you know, kind of going into the neighboring neighborhood. Can you address this phenomenon perhaps from different points of view?
Yeah, this is real. Let's say it's real. It happens in some places and it doesn't happen in other places. But everybody's afraid of gentrification. Everybody's afraid of, you know, particularly if we're talking about people who have been marginalized and they're holding on to their neighborhood as their thing, right? And feel like, man, yeah, maybe it's not the best neighborhood. Maybe it needs to be improved. But if we let it improve, other people are going to come in and take it over. And that can't be our goal. We've got to be better and smarter than that. The idea that we have to keep neighborhoods in bad shape in order to be able to make sure people can afford to live there, we've got to be so much better than that. So we don't have all the answers, but I am convinced that we can collectively come up with a better solution. One of the things I think our model does reasonably well is because we're thinking about high quality mixed income housing that includes a large percentage of deeply, permanently affordable housing, is that it creates a long-term opportunity for low-income families to remain in the community, no matter how desirable the community may become over time. And so one of the things that we advise our network members to do is to control land. If you control land, you control your destiny. And so that's one of the things I like about that community land trust model that we talked about earlier. It creates a long-term affordability strategy while creating opportunities for wealth building based on what the balance is that makes sense in a particular neighborhood. When public sector or philanthropic partners can own land and lease it under a long-term ground lease strategy, you can, again, create long-term affordability in a mixed income model. So that's kind of the structural thing, but that doesn't get to the cultural piece, right? I think purpose-built's best projects are the ones that have been led by people who have the heart of a community organizer, right? And sometimes they actually had skills that actually served in the role of a community organizer. And they could build authentic relationships, and they had long-term relationships. They were not transactional people, right? And so they're building these relationships, and as you're building them, you understand more about what different people in the community care about. we also know that the community doesn't speak with one voice. And so while one person in the community may be saying, you know, I'm worried that my community is going to change, somebody else is going to say, I want my community to change because my property value is going to go up and I'm going to build some wealth that I can leave to my children now. So recognizing that the community doesn't speak in one voice, creating opportunities to hear from lots of different voices. And so you hear all those as you're collectively building your plan. But at the end of the day, control the land, control the destiny. So, you know, whoever that friendly partner is, whether it's a community quarterback organization, whether it's a municipal or philanthropic partner, control the land, control your destiny, and you can at least have some ability to protect everybody getting pushed out, because the market's going to do what the market's going to do. So this is an important strategy. But then the second piece is that cultural community building piece that needs every bit as much intention as the strategy around the housing.
Thank you. So in our last question, Julie Fisk wants to learn a little bit about what is being done here in Rochester and which neighborhood is being targeted. So can you tell us a little bit more about connected communities and
Sure.
perhaps any other work that might be in your purview here in Rochester?
I'll just give you a little bit of a background and encourage you to reach out to LaShunda, Leslie Smith, excuse me. We've been invited. We don't target any place. We go where we're invited. So I should be really clear about that. We don't have a list on a wall. We go where community leaders have invited us. We have been supporting her and her organization and partners in the Emma and Beechwood neighborhoods. They've done some amazing work there over the last 5 or so years. They have not become purpose-built community members because we haven't been able to come up collectively with an education strategy that has been embraced by the district. And so that's the holdup. But even without purpose-built network member status, this team at Connected Communities is doing wonderful work and are aligning partners around a common vision, working with community members to hear their voices and make sure their voices are part of this work. Just doing terrific work. So I would encourage you to reach out to LaShunda.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for your very generous time and sharing your expertise with us. It's been hugely informative, and I have pages of notes that I would love to kind of explore further, but we don't have enough time. But I do invite all of you to join us for a community conversation next week, same time, same place, where we will follow up just as our community. So myself, I will try to invite some other key people, but join us and we will continue this conversation and talk about ways that we can be impactful in our neighborhood and communities. So with that, I need to thank our sponsors. And again, as I said, community conversations coming up next week. Give me just a minute. So up next, please save the date for our 10th annual Reshaping Rochester Awards on November 19th. We look forward to having this also as a Zoom event. So look forward to having you join us then. And also,
thank you. I really enjoyed being with everybody.
Thank you. Please tell us what you think. The survey, really, we do go through the surveys and they are very informative in helping us to improve our programming. And lastly, we have a gift for Carol. So we have a wonderful purse of your own that was donated by the Susan B. Anthony House. That and a collection of other items will be sent to you, Carol, as a thank you for you being with us today. So thanks.
That is
so
lovely.
much.
Thank you so much. That's really lovely. Thanks.
Well, our theme this year was, celebrating women, and we really had wonderful partners in being able to do that. So thank you so much. And with that, we say goodbye. Please join us again next week, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, everyone.